a little girl was punished and abandoned by her stepdad behind the church until a millionaire saw. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin our story. It was a bitter winter afternoon when a lonely millionaire found himself walking down an unfamiliar street. The wind cut through his coat as if it had a mind of its own, and the icy chill seemed to mirror the emptiness he felt inside. His name was Henry, a man of wealth and power, but also a man who had lost the connection to the world around him. The city was alive with the hustle and bustle of holiday shoppers, the sound of laughter and joy filling the air. But Henry was alone, lost in his thoughts. His life, despite the grand office and impressive titles, felt hollow. His marriage had fallen apart years ago, and his connection to his family had been severed. He had built his empire, but at what cost? He didn't know what had brought him to this street today. Maybe it was the empty feeling in his chest, or perhaps the nagging reminder that he was always walking alone. But whatever the reason, he found himself at the edge of a small churchyard, looking at a figure in the distance. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a shadow, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old. She was hunched over, her thin coat barely protecting her from the cold, her small frame shaking in the winter air, and beside her, a bag lay discarded, its contents spilled onto the ground. Henry's steps slowed, his heart tugging with a strange feeling he couldn't quite place. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear, and in that moment, everything seemed to stop. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, don't let them take me," she said, her words breaking the silence of the street. Henry froze, his mind racing. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing like this. The girl's eyes, full of pain and fear, seemed to reach into his very soul. He knelt down beside her, his hands trembling as he gently touched her shoulder. "Who's going to take you?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. The girl flinched at his touch, her hands tightening around the bag as she pulled it close. "My stepdad. He's going to make me go back," she whispered, her voice shaking with terror. He left me here." The words hit Henry like a punch to the gut. He looked around, searching for any sign of the man who had abandoned this little girl. But the street was empty. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew one thing for sure. This child needed help, and he was the only one who could give it. Without thinking, Henry scooped the little girl into his arms, her small body feeling fragile against his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." The girl clung to him, her tiny fingers wrapped around the lapels of his coat, as if she were afraid to let go. Henry could feel her heartbeat, fast and frantic, but there was a sense of relief too, as if she had found a moment of safety in the midst of the storm. He didn't know what the future held for this little girl, but in that moment, he made a promise to her. He wouldn't let her face the darkness alone. A few moments later, Henry had arrived at the nearest hospital, his heart still racing from the sudden turn of events. He had managed to get the little girl, whose name he learned was Emily, into the back seat of his car and wrapped her in his warm coat. But her small frame was still trembling with fear. The entire ride was filled with silence, save for the occasional muffled sobs that escaped her. Henry tried to keep his composure, his mind running a mile a minute, wondering how something so tragic could happen in his own city. His mind flickered back to the words she had whispered in the street. He left me here. Who was this man who could abandon a child like that? And why did it take him, a stranger, to notice her? At the hospital, a nurse quickly rushed over to help as Henry carefully carried Emily through the sliding doors. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, mixing with the quiet beeps of machines and distant voices of doctors and nurses. Henry's sharp eyes scanned the room, looking for answers, but none came. He handed Emily over to the nurse, who guided him to a nearby chair to sit and wait. He had never been one to sit idle, but this felt different. Emily had been through something Henry could never fully understand, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. As he waited, his thoughts wandered back to his own life. It was filled with meetings, contracts, and endless reports, but it all felt hollow now. He had everything a man could want, but he had never known true connection. And now, here he was, holding on to the hope that he could help this little girl find something she had been deprived of: safety. After what seemed like an eternity, the doctor entered. He looked at Henry first, then down at the small girl in the hospital bed. "She's stable," the doctor said, his voice calm. But there was something unsettling in his eyes. "Her injuries are consistent with neglect. We'll need to run a few tests. But I'm afraid this isn't the first time something like this has happened to her." Henry felt a cold wave wash over him. He had hoped that somehow Emily's pain was just a one-time event, but this wasn't the case. "What does that mean?" Henry asked, his voice hoarse. "It means we'll have to investigate," the doctor said, taking a seat across from him. "The girl's stepfather has a history of this sort of behavior. It's likely she's been through more than we can see on the surface." Henry felt a lump form in his throat. The idea that a man could inflict such pain on an innocent child was incomprehensible to him. But even more so was the realization that Emily had been living with this for so long, possibly without anyone to stand up for her. "What happens now?" Henry asked, his hands clenched into fists. "We'll take care of her," the doctor replied, his voice softening. "But she'll need more than just medical care. She'll need a stable home, someone to take her in." Henry sat back in his chair, the weight of the situation sinking in. His heart told him what he had to do, but his mind hesitated. Could he really take this girl in? He didn't know the first thing about being a parent, and his life was filled with enough complications. But there was something in Emily's eyes, something that told him she had been through far too much on her own. And maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference in her life. As he sat there, contemplating, Emily stirred in the hospital bed. Her small eyes opened slowly, and she looked up at him. "Are you going to leave me too?" she whispered, her voice small and filled with uncertainty. Henry's heart shattered. No child should ever have to ask that question. "No, Emily," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, Henry knew that everything in his life was about to change. He didn't know how or when, but he would be there for Emily no matter what. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. A few days passed, and Henry's life began to change in ways he could never have predicted. He had taken Emily into his home, a sprawling mansion with towering windows that overlooked the city. It was a place that once felt cold and empty, now filled with the sound of footsteps and laughter that had been absent for far too long. Emily had settled in surprisingly quickly, though she was still fragile, often retreating into herself. Henry had done his best to make her feel safe, but he could tell there were deep scars that wouldn't heal overnight. Each day was a slow process of rebuilding trust, and he wasn't sure if he could ever fully understand the pain she had endured. But he was determined to help her find her way out of the darkness. Their mornings were quiet at first, with Emily sitting at the kitchen table, eating her breakfast in silence, her eyes always distant. But gradually, as the days turned into weeks, Henry noticed small changes. She started asking questions about his life, about the business empire he had built, and about the things he loved. They would talk about the little things, like her favorite colors, the kind of music she liked to listen to, and the stories she enjoyed reading. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, as Henry sat in his study, looking over the financial reports for his latest project, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was Emily. She stood there in her pajamas, clutching a small stuffed bear in her hands, her eyes wide and filled with curiosity. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice tentative, as if unsure of whether it was okay to disturb him. Henry smiled gently and motioned for her to come in. "Of course, Emily. What's on your mind?" He set the papers aside, giving her his full attention. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her small voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to know, why are you helping me?" Henry's heart tightened at her question. He had been so focused on trying to provide for her that he hadn't really stopped to think about how it must feel for her. She had been through so much, and here she was, asking him why he cared. "I don't know if I can explain it, Emily," Henry said softly, leaning forward. "But I saw you, and I couldn't just walk away. You didn't deserve what happened to you, and I want to make sure you know that there are people who care, who want to protect you." Emily looked down at the bear in her hands, her fingers trembling as she ran them over the worn fabric. "But what if I'm not worth it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Henry felt his chest constrict at the pain in her words. He reached out and gently lifted her chin, forcing her to look him in the eye. "You are worth it, Emily. More than you'll ever know. You deserve to be loved and to be safe, and I will make sure you always have that." The words felt like a promise, something he would never break. Emily's eyes welled up with tears, and before he knew it, she had thrown her arms around him, holding on to him tightly, as if afraid he would disappear. Henry was taken aback for a moment, but he quickly wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I won't leave you," he whispered. "I promise. I'll never leave you." The sound of her soft sobs filled the room, and in that moment, Henry realized something. It wasn't just Emily who was healing. He was too. The emptiness that had once consumed him began to fade, replaced by the warmth of connection, the kind of connection he had longed for, but never knew how to find. It was in that moment that Henry understood the true meaning of family. It wasn't about bloodlines or societal expectations. It was about love, trust, and being there for each other when it mattered most. As he held Emily close, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The road would be difficult, and there would be days when the scars of her past would resurface. But Henry was determined to help her heal, just as she was helping him heal. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was she. A few weeks passed, and Emily slowly began to adjust to her new life with Henry. Each day brought new challenges, but there were moments of progress. Moments where the girl who once flinched at every loud noise started to smile again. Henry had kept his promise, making sure that Emily had everything she needed, not just physically, but emotionally. He had brought in a therapist to help her process the trauma. And every night, they would sit together at dinner, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Emily pushed her food around her plate, her eyes distant. Henry, noticing her silence, decided to break the stillness. "Emily, how was your day today?" he asked, his voice gentle. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "It was okay," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. I met some other kids at school. They were nice. Henry smiled, his heart warming at her words. It had been a big step for Emily to start going back to school after everything she had been through, and hearing that she had made some friends felt like a victory. That's great to hear, he said. Making friends is important. And remember, if you ever need to talk, I'm always here. Emily nodded, but there was something lingering in her eyes. Henry could tell there was more on her mind, but he didn't press her. Instead, he continued to eat, giving her the space she needed. Later that evening, as they were preparing to go to bed, Emily approached him again. "Henry," she began, her voice hesitant. He turned to face her, noticing the way she was clutching the stuffed bear he had given her when she first arrived. I think I want to try to visit my mom's grave," she said, her words trembling slightly. Henry's heart sank at the mention of her mother. He had known that Emily had been through so much, but hearing her speak of her mother was a reminder of the pain she had carried for so long. "I think that's a good idea, Emily," Henry replied softly, kneeling down to her level. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be there with you." Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. "Do you think my mom would be proud of me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry's heart tightened. "I'm sure she would be," he said, reaching out to gently squeeze her hand. "You're strong, and you're brave, and you've already come so far." Emily's lips quivered as she tried to hold back tears. "I miss her so much," she whispered, her voice breaking. Henry pulled her into a warm embrace, holding her tightly as she cried. He didn't have the words to take away her pain, but he knew that he had to be there for her, just as he had promised. The next morning, Henry and Emily made their way to the cemetery. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the landscape as they walked through the rows of gravestones. Emily walked beside him, her small hand holding his tightly, her steps slow but determined. When they reached her mother's grave, Emily stopped, her eyes scanning the name on the stone. She knelt down, placing a single flower on the grave. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice soft but full of emotion. "I've been so scared, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be strong." Henry stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He didn't know what to say, but he knew that this moment was important for Emily. It was a moment of closure, a step toward healing. As they stood there in silence, the wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, Emily seemed at peace. The tears that had once flowed so freely now seemed to have quieted, replaced by a sense of calm. Henry knew that this was just one small step in Emily's journey, but it was a step that mattered. And as he watched her, standing in front of her mother's grave, he realized just how much he had changed, too. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that hospital room all those weeks ago. He had found something that he had been missing for so long, a sense of purpose, a reason to care. And as they walked back to the car, Emily looked up at him, a small smile on her face. "Thank you, Henry," she said softly. "I feel better now." Henry smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. I'm just happy I'm here for you." Together, they got into the car and drove back home, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Days turned into weeks, and Henry noticed Emily's gradual transformation. It wasn't an overnight change, but each day, she seemed to open up more, her laughter ringing through the house more frequently. It was clear that Emily was beginning to feel safe again. But with that safety came something Henry wasn't prepared for: moments when the past would come rushing back. One afternoon, Henry arrived home from work earlier than usual, his mind consumed with thoughts of the upcoming business deal. He barely noticed the quiet house as he stepped inside. That is, until he heard soft sobs coming from the living room. He rushed to the source of the sound, his heart pounding with concern. There, sitting on the couch, was Emily, her face buried in her hands, her small frame trembling. Henry's heart dropped. He knelt down beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, what's wrong?" he asked softly. Emily looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to stop feeling sad, Henry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought it would get easier, but sometimes it feels like everything is still too much." Henry's chest tightened as he sat beside her, his hand still on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. "I know it's hard, Emily. You've been through so much, and it's okay to feel sad sometimes. It doesn't mean you're not strong. It just means you're human." Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, sniffling. "I want to forget. I want to stop thinking about the things that hurt," she said, her voice barely audible. Henry nodded, understanding her pain. He had watched her fight to move forward, but the shadows of her past weren't so easily banished. "You don't have to forget, Emily," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You just have to remember that it doesn't define you. It's a part of your story, but it's not the whole story." Emily looked up at him, her expression still full of confusion and sorrow. "How do I do that?" she asked. Henry smiled gently, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "One step at a time," he said. "You take each day as it comes. And when the hard days come, you know you don't have to go through them alone. I'll always be here." Emily's lips trembled, and for a moment, it seemed like the floodgates would open again. But then, as if in that moment, something shifted. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll try," she said softly. The next few days brought a mix of emotions for both of them. Emily's sadness wasn't something that could be fixed with just words. But Henry had seen a spark in her again. It was a spark of hope, of strength. It was there, even in the darkest moments. One Saturday, after they had spent the morning together in the garden, planting flowers that Henry had promised Emily they would take care of, Emily turned to him with a shy smile. "Henry, I want to try something," she said. Henry looked at her, intrigued. "What do you want to try?" he asked. "I want to write a letter to my mom," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I never really got to say goodbye, and I think it might help me let go of some of the pain." Henry's heart swelled with pride. He knew this was a huge step for Emily, a step toward healing that she had taken all on her own. "I think that's a great idea," he said, his voice warm with encouragement. "Do you want me to help you?" Emily shook her head, her determination shining through. "No, I think I can do it myself. But can I show it to you when I'm done?" she asked, her eyes searching his for approval. Henry smiled, his heart full of love for this brave, strong girl who had come so far. "Of course, Emily," he said. "I'll be right here." The next few hours passed in a quiet kind of peace, with Emily sitting at the kitchen table, writing her letter. Henry didn't interrupt her, giving her the space she needed. It was the first time he had seen her so focused, so determined. When Emily finally finished, she walked over to him, holding the folded paper in her hands. "I'm done," she said softly. Henry took the letter, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded it. The words were simple, but they were full of emotion, full of everything Emily had been carrying inside. As he read, he could feel the weight of her pain, but also the strength she had found to move forward. "It's beautiful, Emily," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Emily smiled, a small but genuine smile. And for the first time, In a long time, Henry felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew the road ahead would still be hard, but they would face it together, step by step. As the weeks went by, the bond between Henry and Emily grew stronger. It wasn't without its challenges, of course. Emily still struggled with the ghosts of her past, but with each passing day, she seemed a little more at peace. Henry's life had changed, too. He had never imagined he would find himself so deeply invested in the life of a little girl. But there was something about Emily, something about the way she had fought through her pain, that kept him grounded. He began to notice that he wasn't just providing for her needs, he was starting to care in a way he hadn't cared about anything in a long time. One afternoon, after school, Emily came home with a wide grin on her face. Henry was sitting in his study, reviewing some documents, when he heard her footsteps approaching. "Guess what, Henry?" she said, her voice brimming with excitement. Henry looked up from his papers, a smile spreading across his face as he saw the look of pure joy on her face. "What is it, Emily?" he asked, intrigued. Emily held up a small, crumpled piece of paper. "I got an A on my math test. I did it all by myself." Henry's heart swelled with pride as he stood up and walked over to her. He kneeled down to her level, his eyes filled with admiration. "I'm so proud of you, Emily. You've been working really hard, and it shows." Emily beamed, the glow of her success lighting up her face. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. Henry's heart skipped a beat. The words came as a surprise, but they were the most meaningful words Emily had ever said to him. He didn't realize how much it meant to him to hear her say that. "You did it all on your own, Emily," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm just here to support you." Emily nodded, but Henry could see the deeper truth in her eyes. She had been through so much, and this small victory, this simple achievement, meant the world to her. It wasn't just about the grade. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above the darkness of her past. As the weeks continued to pass, Henry noticed other changes in Emily. She was more confident, more open with her feelings. She laughed more freely, played more often, and even began to make plans for her future. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. And though she still carried scars, they no longer defined her. One evening, as Henry was preparing dinner, Emily sat at the kitchen table, quietly sketching in her notebook. She had always been quiet, but these moments of solitude seemed different now. Henry looked over at her, a thought forming in his mind. "Emily, have you ever thought about what you want to do when you grow up?" he asked, his tone casual but curious. Emily paused, her pencil hovering over the paper as she thought for a moment. "I don't know," she said, her voice soft. "I used to think I wanted to be a teacher, but I'm not sure anymore." Henry smiled warmly. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. The important thing is that you have a future to look forward to." Emily's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a spark of something that had been missing, a sense of possibility. "I guess you're right," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Maybe I'll be an artist. I really like drawing." Henry chuckled softly, proud of her for expressing her dreams. "That sounds wonderful, Emily. You can do anything you set your mind to." Emily smiled, a look of determination in her eyes. "I will," she said, her confidence growing with each passing day. But just as life seemed to be settling into a rhythm, something unexpected happened. One evening, as Henry was walking home from a late meeting, he received a call that made his heart drop. It was from the social worker who had been handling Emily's case. "Henry, we need to talk," the voice on the other end said, a note of urgency in their tone. "There's a situation with Emily's biological father." Henry's blood ran cold. He had heard bits and pieces about Emily's past, but he had always tried to shield her from the painful details. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "It seems that Emily's father has been trying to regain custody of her," the social worker explained. "He's been petitioning the courts, and we've just been informed that he's scheduled to meet with a judge next week." Henry's heart raced. He had known that Emily's biological father had been absent from her life, but the thought of him showing up now, after everything Emily had been through, felt like a betrayal. "I won't let him take her," Henry said, his voice firm with determination. "Emily is happy here. She's safe here." The social worker paused for a moment. "I know, Henry, and we're doing everything we can to protect her. But you need to be prepared. This could get complicated." Henry's mind raced as he hung up the phone. He looked over at Emily, who was still sitting at the kitchen table, her pencil moving across the paper. She didn't know yet, and he didn't want to burden her with the fear he felt. But deep down, he knew that this would be another test for their bond. Another obstacle they would have to face together. The following week, Henry found himself in a situation he never thought would come to pass. The court date was fast approaching, and he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. Emily had no idea about the custody battle that loomed over her head, and Henry wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. She had finally found a sense of peace, a semblance of normalcy, and he didn't want to disrupt that. But the thought of her father, the man who had abandoned her all those years ago, now coming back to try to claim her, Henry couldn't wrap his mind around it. The past few days had been filled with endless paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and tense phone calls with the social worker. It was clear that Emily's biological father wasn't a stable influence, and Henry had been assured that the chances of him gaining custody were slim. Still, Henry wasn't taking any chances. He knew how important Emily's future was. He had already made up his mind that he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Emily, on the other hand, had been more upbeat than usual. She had been drawing more, working on her art with a focus and passion Henry hadn't seen before. Every now and then, she would ask him about the future, her dreams of being an artist slowly taking shape. Henry couldn't help but feel proud of her. She had come so far from the frightened little girl he had met months ago. One evening, after dinner, Emily came into the living room, where Henry was reading a book. She had that familiar look of excitement in her eyes, the kind that always meant she had something on her mind. "Henry, can we talk?" she asked, her voice full of anticipation. Henry looked up from his book and smiled. "Of course, Emily. What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I was thinking, maybe I could start selling some of my drawings. Like, to people who like art. Maybe I could get a little money for them, and I could save up for something special." Henry blinked, surprised by the suddenness of her idea. "That's a great idea, Emily. I think you're ready for it. You've worked really hard, and your art is amazing." Emily smiled, her face lighting up with pride. "I've been practicing a lot," she said. "I think I could do it, Henry. I think I could really do it." Henry nodded, impressed by her confidence. He knew that this was more than just a way for her to make a little extra money. This was her way of reclaiming control over her life, taking ownership of her future. "I believe in you, Emily," he said. "If this is what you want to do, I'll support you every step of the way." The next few days were spent in a whirlwind of activity. Emily spent her afternoons working on new drawings, each one better than the last. Henry helped her set up an online portfolio and gave her guidance on how to present her work. Slowly, the idea of selling her art began to take shape, and soon enough, Emily was ready to take her first step into the world of art sales. But as Emily began to embrace her new path, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The court date was drawing near, and he could feel the tension building. He had been trying to keep things normal for Emily, But the reality of the situation weighed heavily on him. He knew that the man who had once abandoned her was now coming back into her life, and he couldn't help but fear what that might do to the girl he had come to care for so deeply. On the morning of the court hearing, Henry woke up early. The air was thick with tension, and he could barely bring himself to eat breakfast. Emily was still asleep, her small form curled up in bed, unaware of the battle that was about to unfold. As Henry drove to the courthouse, his mind raced. He was trying to prepare himself for whatever outcome awaited them, but nothing seemed to ease the anxiety in his chest. When he arrived at the courthouse, he found the usual legal paperwork awaiting him. He signed a few documents, met briefly with his lawyer, and waited. It felt like time was moving in slow motion. But then, just before the hearing was about to begin, Henry was called into a small room to meet with the judge. He was given a chance to speak about his relationship with Emily, to explain why he believed he was the better guardian for her. It was a difficult conversation, and for a moment, Henry found himself struggling to find the right words. But as he spoke about his commitment to Emily's well-being, about the love and support he had given her, he realized that the fight wasn't just about custody. It was about giving Emily the life she deserved, the life she had always been denied. When the judge entered the courtroom, the proceedings began. Henry's heart pounded in his chest as he sat there, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, signaling the start of the hearing. Emily's biological father, who had been absent for so long, was seated across from him. The man looked different than Henry had imagined, older, worn down by the years. But there was no mistaking the indifference in his eyes, the same indifference that had led him to abandon his daughter all those years ago. The hearing went on for hours, filled with legal arguments and presentations. But despite the attempts to paint Henry as an unfit guardian, it was clear that Emily was in a better place now. The judge listened to everything carefully, and after what seemed like an eternity, the ruling came. Emily was to remain with Henry. The relief that flooded Henry's body in that moment was overwhelming. He had won. But more importantly, Emily had won. When he told Emily the news, her face lit up with joy, her relief evident in the way she threw her arms around him. "I knew it, Henry. I knew you would never let anything happen to me." Henry smiled, holding her close. "I told you, Emily, I'll always be here for you." The days following the court ruling were filled with a newfound sense of peace for Henry and Emily. The threat of losing her had loomed over them for so long, but now that the legal battle was behind them, they could finally breathe. Emily's laughter filled the house more freely, and for the first time, Henry began to feel like he was truly a father figure to her. It was more than just providing for her needs, it was about being there for her, offering her the love and security she had so desperately craved. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Emily pulled out her sketchbook, her face lit with excitement. "Henry, look at this," she said, flipping the pages to reveal her latest drawings. Henry's eyes softened as he took in the detail and care she had put into each piece. "These are amazing, Emily," he said, his voice full of pride. Emily smiled, a shy but genuine smile, and for the first time, Henry saw the confidence in her that had been buried for so long. She was finding her voice, not just through her art, but in the world around her. The next step in Emily's journey came sooner than Henry had expected. One morning, Emily came to him with a worried look on her face. "Henry," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm supposed to go to my school's art show next week, but I don't think my artwork is good enough to show. What if no one likes it?" Henry set aside the papers he had been working on and looked at her. "Emily, listen to me. Your art is incredible, and it's a part of who you are. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. What matters is that you're proud of it, that you're expressing yourself. That's what makes it special. Emily looked down at her hands, unsure. But what if people laugh at me? She asked quietly. Henry reached out, gently lifting her chin so that their eyes met. People might not always understand, but you don't need their approval to be proud of who you are. You have a gift, Emily, and you should share it with the world. Don't let fear stop you. There was a long pause, and Emily finally nodded, a hesitant but determined look crossing her face. Okay, I'll do it. I'll share my art. Henry smiled, a feeling of pride swelling in his chest. Emily had come so far, and he knew she was on the right path. The art show was a turning point for Emily. As she stood in front of her work, she could see people admiring her pieces, commenting on the beauty and depth of each drawing. She wasn't sure if it was the way they looked at her art or the way they saw her for the first time that made her feel so empowered. But for the first time, in a long time, she felt truly seen. When the show was over, Emily came running to Henry, her face bright with excitement. "I did it, Henry," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "People actually liked my art. They said it was beautiful." Henry embraced her tightly, his heart full. "I knew you could do it, Emily. I'm so proud of you." As they walked home from the show, Henry couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. He had seen the fear in her eyes when she first arrived, the scars from the abuse and neglect that had haunted her. But now, she was standing tall, not just surviving but thriving. The little girl who had once felt abandoned and unloved was now a young woman with a future, full of possibilities. That night, as they sat down to dinner, Emily looked at him with a smile that was brighter than any of the artwork she had shown that day. "Henry," she said, her voice full of emotion, "thank you for everything. I don't know where I'd be without you." Henry felt a lump in his throat. He had never imagined that this little girl, who had come into his life so unexpectedly, would become so important to him. "You don't need to thank me, Emily. I'm just happy to be here for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. But in his heart, Henry knew that it wasn't just a matter of being there for her. It was about the bond they had built, the love they had shared, and the way they had both helped each other heal. Emily was no longer a frightened child. She had become a strong, independent young woman with a bright future ahead of her, and Henry couldn't be prouder. As they finished their meal, Henry looked at her and smiled. "You've come a long way, Emily. But this is just the beginning. The future is yours, and I'll always be here to help you get there." Emily smiled back, her eyes full of gratitude and hope. "I know, Henry, and I'll never forget what you've done for me." They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but together, they had proven that they could face anything. And for the first time in years, Henry felt truly at peace, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The months passed, and Henry and Emily settled into a comfortable routine. The bond between them was stronger than ever, and Emily continued to thrive. Her art had blossomed into something beautiful, and she began to gain recognition in local galleries. But as the world around them seemed to become brighter, Emily still carried a deep, hidden pain that no amount of art could fully erase. Henry had noticed the subtle shifts moments when Emily would withdraw, her thoughts clouded by something only she understood. It was one evening, as they sat together in the living room, when Emily finally spoke of it. "Henry," she began quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Henry looked up from his book, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it, Emily?" he asked, setting the book aside and giving her his full attention. Emily took a deep breath, her hands clutching the edge of the couch. "I've been thinking about my past," she said softly, her eyes downcast. "About everything that happened before. before I came to you. Henry felt a pang in his chest. He had always tried to protect Emily from her past, shielding her from the painful memories. But now, she was ready to face them. He could see it in her eyes. She needed to confront it, to make peace with it. "I'm here for you, Emily," Henry said gently, his voice steady. "You don't have to carry it alone. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I just keep wondering why my mom left me. Why didn't she fight for me? Was it my fault?" Henry's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Emily, it wasn't your fault," he said firmly, his words carrying the weight of truth. "Your mom may have had her own struggles, but you were never the reason for any of it. You were a child, and you deserved love, care, and protection. Sometimes, people make choices based on their own pain, but that doesn't make them your fault." Emily nodded slowly, but the doubt in her eyes remained. "But it still hurts, Henry. It hurts knowing that she left me behind," she whispered. Henry moved closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know it does," he said softly. "It's okay to hurt, Emily. It's okay to feel those things. But I want you to know, you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'll always be here." For a long moment, they sat together in silence, the weight of Emily's words hanging in the air. Henry could feel the depth of her pain, but he also saw the strength in her, the courage to face her past and not let it define her. "I don't want to be angry at her anymore," Emily said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to be free of all of this." Henry nodded. "You will be, Emily. You're already starting to heal. It's not going to be easy, but you're stronger than you think." That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Henry sat alone in the living room, deep in thought. The conversation with Emily had stirred something inside him. He realized that, in many ways, he had been protecting her from her past, but he hadn't truly allowed her to heal from it. He hadn't let her grieve fully, hadn't let her experience the emotions that came with the pain of abandonment. He understood now that in order for Emily to move forward, she needed to confront those emotions, and he needed to support her in that, even if it was hard for him to watch. The next day, Henry took Emily to the beach. They stood at the edge of the water, the cool breeze blowing through their hair. The waves crashed gently against the shore, and for the first time in a long time, Emily seemed at peace. Henry watched as she closed her eyes, taking in the sound of the ocean. "I've been thinking," Emily said after a while, her voice calm and thoughtful. "Maybe I need to let go of the past. I don't want to keep carrying it with me. It's like a weight I've been dragging around, and I think I'm ready to put it down." Henry smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That's a big step, Emily, and I'm so proud of you for taking it." Emily smiled back, a sense of relief in her eyes. "It's not going to be easy, but I'm going to try." They spent the rest of the day on the beach, walking along the shore, talking about anything and everything. For the first time in a long time, Emily seemed to find a sense of closure. She wasn't completely free of her past, but she had taken a huge step toward healing. As they drove home that evening, Emily looked over at Henry with a smile. "Thanks for today, Henry," she said softly. "I think I'm starting to understand that it's okay to feel everything. It's okay to let go." Henry reached over and placed his hand on hers. "You're not alone in this, Emily," he said, "and you never will be." Together, they drove home, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they would face it side by side. Months passed, and Emily's life began to fall into place in ways Henry had only hoped for. The quiet, gentle rhythms of their daily routines became a foundation for Emily's growth, and Henry began to see glimpses of the young woman she was becoming. Her art flourished, and though it was still a process, Emily was no longer burdened by the same fears and insecurities that once weighed her down. But the journey wasn't without its struggles. One day, while Henry was working from home, he received an unexpected call from the school principal. "Mr. Grant," the principal's voice sounded serious. "I need to speak with you about Emily. There's been an incident." Henry's heart sank. "What happened?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It seems Emily got into an argument with another student," the principal explained. "It wasn't physical, but it was heated. We've talked to both of them, but I believe it would be best if you came in to discuss it." Henry's mind raced as he thanked the principal and hung up. Emily had come so far, but he knew there were still parts of her past that lingered. The anger, the hurt, it was all still there, simmering beneath the surface. When he arrived at the school, Emily was sitting in the principal's office, her eyes downcast, her body tense. "Emily," Henry said softly, sitting down next to her. "What happened?" Emily shrugged, her face hardening with a mix of frustration and shame. "Some kid made fun of my drawings," she said, her voice low. "He said they were stupid, and I got mad." Henry's heart ached for her. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the years of pain she had carried with her, and it made sense now. Emily had always been sensitive to criticism. Too much of it had been harsh and unkind in her past. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Emily," he said gently. "But we can't let others control how we feel about ourselves. Your art is amazing, and no one can take that away from you." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "But it hurt," she whispered. "It always hurts when people say things like that." Henry nodded, understanding the deep pain behind her words. "I know, Emily. It's okay to feel hurt, but you don't have to carry that anger with you. You've worked so hard to find your voice. Don't let anyone steal that from you." Emily was quiet for a moment, processing his words. The principal, who had been standing off to the side, stepped forward. "Mr. Grant, I understand that Emily is going through a lot, but I think this might be a good opportunity for her to learn how to handle conflicts in a healthier way. We can offer her counseling sessions, if you think that would help." Henry looked at Emily, seeing the vulnerability in her expression. He nodded. "Yes," he said. "I think that would be a good idea." After the meeting, Emily was quiet on the drive home. Henry didn't push her to talk, knowing that she would open up when she was ready, but he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. The incident had shaken him, not because he was angry with Emily, but because he had seen how much pain she was still carrying. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Emily looked up at him. "Henry," she said, her voice soft, "I know I messed up today. I shouldn't have let what that kid said get to me. I shouldn't have lost my temper." Henry reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "You're not perfect, Emily. None of us are. What matters is that you're learning from it. You've come so far, and I'm so proud of you. But it's okay to feel angry sometimes, as long as you don't let it control you." Emily smiled faintly, the weight of the day seeming to lift just a little. "I'll try," she said quietly. "I'll try to be better." Over the next few weeks, Emily started attending counseling sessions. It wasn't easy for her. At first, she was hesitant to open up, afraid of being judged or misunderstood. But little by little, she began to talk about the things that had been haunting her for so long. The abandonment, the neglect, the fear, the anger that had simmered beneath the surface for years. As Emily worked through her emotions, Henry began to notice a shift in her. She was more grounded, more present. The defensive walls she had built around herself started to crack, and for the first time, Henry saw her truly begin to heal. One day, As they sat together in the living room, Emily turned to him with a thoughtful look on her face. "Henry," she said, "I think I'm starting to understand that it's okay to feel all the things I've been feeling. It doesn't make me weak." Henry smiled, his heart full of pride. "Exactly, Emily. It takes real strength to face your emotions and work through them. And you're stronger than you know." Emily nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. "Thank you for always being there for me, Henry. I know I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Henry's smile widened, and he pulled her into a hug. "I'll always be here, Emily. Always." As they held each other, Henry realized just how far they had come, and how much further they could go together. The road hadn't always been easy, but it had been worth it. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger than ever. As the years passed, Emily continued to grow, both as an artist and as a person. The girl who had once been consumed by fear and doubt was now a young woman full of promise. Henry had watched her evolve into someone confident, someone who knew her worth. Her art had become more than just a way to express herself. It had become a source of inspiration for others. She had started selling her paintings at local art galleries, and people were beginning to take notice. But as much as she had grown, Henry knew there were still parts of her past that she had to confront. One evening, after a particularly long day, Henry sat in the living room, staring at a letter that had arrived earlier that afternoon. It was from Emily's biological father. He had been quiet for so long, and just when Henry thought he had faded out of Emily's life, he reappeared. The letter was brief, but its message was clear. He wanted to reconnect with Emily. Henry sat in silence, unsure of what to do. He knew that this was something Emily would have to decide for herself, but he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in his chest. He didn't want Emily to be hurt again, and he feared that her father's reappearance could undo everything she had worked so hard for. Emily had been through so much already, she didn't deserve to be pulled back into that chaos. The next morning, Henry sat down with Emily over breakfast, the letter sitting unopened between them. He watched as she spread butter on her toast, her brow furrowed as she glanced at the letter. "What's that?" she asked, her voice quiet. Henry hesitated, unsure of how to approach the subject. "It's from your father," he said softly, watching her reaction closely. Emily's face hardened slightly, but she didn't look surprised. "He wants to see me, doesn't he?" she asked, her voice tinged with bitterness. Henry nodded, his heart heavy. "I know you've been through a lot, and I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what you decide. But I also want you to understand that this could be difficult." Emily took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the letter. "I don't know what to feel about him anymore," she said quietly. "He left me. He abandoned me when I needed him the most." Henry nodded, his voice full of understanding. "I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. But you don't have to go through this alone. You have a choice now, Emily. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Emily sat in silence for a long moment, her eyes distant as she thought it over. Henry could see the turmoil in her eyes, the battle between the girl she had been and the young woman she was becoming. "I don't know if I can forgive him," Emily said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know if I can forget what he did to me." Henry reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You don't have to forgive him if you're not ready," he said softly. "And you don't have to forget the past. But you do deserve to have control over your life, Emily. You deserve to decide who is a part of it." Emily nodded slowly, her mind clearly at work. "I just don't want to be hurt again," she admitted. Henry smiled warmly at her, his heart full of pride. "I understand, and I promise you, No matter what happens, I'll always be here to help you pick up the pieces. That evening, Emily decided to write a letter in response to her father. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she needed to face it on her own terms. As she wrote, her hand trembled slightly, but the words flowed from her heart. She spoke of her past, of the pain she had carried, but also of the strength she had found in herself. "I've learned to survive on my own," she wrote. "I've learned to forgive myself, and now I'm learning how to move forward. I don't know if I can forgive you, and I'm not sure I want to, but I'm making my own way now, and I won't let the past control me any longer." When Emily finished, she placed the letter in an envelope, sealed it, and handed it to Henry. "I think I'm ready," she said quietly. "Ready to make my decision." Henry took the envelope from her and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. "You're stronger than you realize, Emily," he said softly. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Over the next few days, Emily spent a lot of time reflecting on her decision. She spent time with her art, focused on her goals, and allowed herself to think about what kind of future she wanted. And when the day came to meet her father, she was calm. She knew that her past didn't define her, and the woman she had become could handle whatever came next. When she walked into the room to meet her father, she was no longer the little girl who had been abandoned. She was strong, confident, and ready to face the truth, no matter what it was. As she sat down across from him, her heart steady, she knew that this was another step in her journey, another step toward healing. And no matter the outcome, she would always have Henry by her side. The weeks after Emily's letter to her father passed slowly, but a quiet peace settled in their home. Emily, though still carrying the weight of her past, was learning how to navigate the world with more confidence, one step at a time. Henry watched with pride as she continued to grow, not just as an artist, but as a young woman who was starting to find her own place in the world. It was a morning like any other when the phone rang. Henry glanced at the caller ID, his heart skipping a beat. It was the social worker from the court system, the one who had been overseeing Emily's case. He had not expected to hear from her so soon. "Mr. Grant," the voice on the other end began, "I wanted to update you on Emily's father. We've received some new information, and we need to discuss the next steps." Henry's heart raced as the words sank in. "What happened?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've been in contact with Emily's father," the social worker continued. "He's still adamant about seeing her, and we need to determine if he is in any way fit to have contact with her. There's a hearing scheduled for next week, and I wanted to make sure you were prepared." The words hit Henry like a tidal wave. After everything they had been through, after Emily's struggles to heal, her biological father was still trying to force his way back into her life. "I don't want her to go through this again," Henry said quietly. "She's doing so well now. I can't let him hurt her again." "I understand your concerns," the social worker replied. "But the law requires us to investigate any attempts at contact. You'll have an opportunity to speak at the hearing and make your case." Henry sighed deeply, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He had known that Emily's past would always be a part of her, but he had hoped it would stay buried, far away from the peaceful life they had built. That night, as they sat down to dinner, Henry had to face the hardest conversation he'd had with Emily in a long time. She had been in high spirits all day, her art projects progressing, and for a moment, everything felt normal. But as he set his fork down, Emily looked at him, sensing that something was off. "Henry, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Henry hesitated. How could he tell her that her father, the man who had abandoned her all those years ago, was still trying to claim a place in her life? "Emily," he began softly, "I need to tell you something. I've received word from the social worker. Your father is pushing for visitation again. He wants to see you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Emily said nothing. Her face, which had been bright with excitement just moments before, clouded over with confusion and hurt. "But why now?" she asked, her voice small. "After everything he's done, after everything I've been through, why would he want to be a part of my life now?" Henry reached across the table, his hand gently touching hers. "I don't have all the answers, Emily," he said, his voice full of emotion, "but I want you to know that you don't have to see him if you don't want to. I will always stand by you, no matter what you choose." Emily looked at him, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know if I'm ready to see him again," she whispered. "I don't know if I can trust him." Henry's heart broke at the pain in her voice, but he understood. Trust was something that couldn't be rebuilt overnight, and her feelings were valid. "I know, Emily," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. Take your time. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Over the next few days, Emily seemed distant. She spent a lot of time in her room, working on her art. But Henry could tell that she was wrestling with the decision. He gave her space, but also reminded her that he was there whenever she needed to talk. The night before the hearing, Emily came to him. She was quiet, but there was a sense of determination in her eyes. "Henry," she said, sitting next to him on the couch, "I've been thinking about what you said, and I think I'm ready to face him. Not because I want to, but because I need to. I need to know that I can control this part of my life, and that I don't have to let him hurt me again." Henry nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "You are so strong, Emily, and no matter what happens tomorrow, you're not alone. We'll face this together." The next day, they arrived at the courthouse early, the tension thick in the air. Emily was quiet as they waited, but Henry could see the strength in her posture. She was nervous, yes, but she was also ready. When the hearing finally began, Henry spoke first, his voice steady as he explained the circumstances of Emily's past and how far she had come. He told the court about the love and security he had provided, how Emily had blossomed under his care, and how he was committed to making sure she had the chance to thrive. Emily's biological father spoke next, his voice distant and uninterested, as though he was more concerned with his own convenience than Emily's well-being. But when Emily spoke, it was clear to everyone in the room that she had found her voice. She spoke of her past, her struggles, and the pain she had carried. She spoke of how she had learned to heal, and how she had finally found a sense of home with Henry. "I don't need him," she said, her voice unwavering. "I have everything I need right here with Henry." The judge listened carefully, then turned to deliver the verdict. After careful consideration, the judge said, "It is decided that Emily will remain with her current guardian, Henry Grant. The request for visitation has been denied." Emily's heart soared as the words sank in. Henry was there, his hand on her shoulder, his support unwavering. "You did it," Henry whispered, a smile on his face. "We did it." And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt the weight of her past finally lifting off her shoulders. She was free. She was free to live her life on her own terms, with the love and support of the man who had never given up on her. Years went by, and Emily's life continued to unfold in the most remarkable ways. The young girl who had once feared the world, who had been broken by abandonment and neglect, was now a confident, independent woman. Henry, too, had changed. He was no longer the man he had been when he first took Emily in, the man who lived only for business and had lost his connection to the world. Now his world was full of laughter, love, and the warmth of a family he had never expected to have. Emily's art flourished, her talent recognized in galleries and exhibitions across the city. She had become a true artist, someone who poured her heart into every piece, using her art to tell the story of her healing journey. But her success was not just in her art, it was in her strength, her resilience, and her ability to embrace life fully. One afternoon, as Henry sat in his office, going over business documents, he heard a knock on the door. "Come in," he called out, not looking up. Emily walked in, her face lighting up with a smile. "Hey, Henry," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Guess what? I got accepted into the prestigious art school I applied to." Henry's heart skipped a beat. He stood up, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Emily, that's amazing. I knew you could do it." He embraced her tightly, his pride for her filling the room. Emily pulled back, her smile softening. "I can't believe it's happening, Henry. I don't think I would have even dared to dream about this before you came into my life." Henry's eyes softened, his voice filled with emotion. "Emily, I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard, and you've come so far. You've earned every bit of this." Emily nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I used to think I wasn't worth anything, but you showed me that I'm more than my past, more than the things I've been through. You gave me a chance to become who I am today." Henry smiled, his heart swelling with love for this incredible young woman. "You gave yourself that chance, Emily. You're the one who decided to fight, to rise above everything that happened to you. I just helped you see the strength that was always inside you." Emily looked at him, her expression serious now. "And I'll never forget that, Henry. I'll never forget what you've done for me." They stood there for a moment, a deep silence between them that said more than words ever could. Emily had grown into the woman she was always meant to be, and Henry had been there for every step of her journey. It wasn't just a father-daughter bond anymore. It was a partnership, a friendship, a connection that could never be broken. As the years went on, they faced challenges together, both big and small. There were times when Emily doubted herself, times when life tested her. But each time, she had Henry by her side. And there were moments when Henry, too, had doubts. But Emily's strength reminded him of the life they had built together. Through it all, their love and support for each other never wavered. And as Emily prepared to leave for art school, Henry stood at the door, watching her with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I'm going to miss you, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily smiled, her eyes bright with excitement. "I'll miss you too, Henry. But this is just the next step in my journey, and I wouldn't be here without you." Henry nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I'll always be here for you, Emily. No matter where life takes you, you're never alone." As Emily walked out the door, Henry stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space she had left behind. But he didn't feel sad. He felt proud of the young woman she had become, proud of the strength she had found within herself, and proud of the life they had built together. Their journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment. Henry knew that Emily was ready to take on the world, and he knew that no matter where her dreams took her, she would always carry the love and lessons of their journey together. The story of a lonely man and a little girl who found each other was just the beginning. Now, they were both free to live the lives they had always deserved.